They're clearly flouting the courts. Look, if it had gone the other way, right? If you had a Supreme Court telling the Trump administration to facilitate the deportation of somebody, do you think there'd be any misunderstanding to that usage of the term? They're clearly an open defiance of not only the district court, but of the Supreme Court of the United States. And as Senator Van Halen just said, this is about the rule of law, and the rule of law affects us all. So whereas, this is a focus obviously on an immigration issue and a removal, an improper and illegal removal to a hellhole prison in El Salvador, this affects all of us. This affects everyone. The through line is to U.S. citizens and Americans.
But specifically, Abrego Garcia is not a U.S. citizen, which the administration has been very quick to point out whenever this is raised, that he actually came illegally from El Salvador, and it is to El Salvador where he was returned, even though a court had ruled he should not be deported to El Salvador, specifically because of threats he faced there. Does that indicate, though, David, that even if he were to be brought back to the U.S. from the prison where he currently is, that he could very easily just deported and sent literally anywhere else beyond El Salvador?
Well, let's remember why he was in the United States. That's because the Trump administration in 2019 found that he was facing a threat to his life or his liberty if he was sent to El Salvador. This was in 2019, and this was in an immigration court. What is an immigration court? It's an agency of the Department of Justice. It's not an Article III court. It's an agency of the Department of Justice. So the Trump administration itself, after extensive vetting of criminal background, after extensive vetting of public safety risks, et cetera, found that Mr. Abrego Garcia would suffer a loss to his liberty or his life if he was sent back to El Salvador. So for them to now come out and use this increasingly hostile and hateful rhetoric, going from "we made a mistake" to now "he's a terrorist," is absolutely absurd. Absolutely absurd. So if he's brought back to the United States, he would be restored to the status that he was in, and that's as a lawfully present non-citizen in the United States under what we call withholding of removal because he faces a loss of liberty or life in El Salvador. That's why this part of it, the whole thing is horrible, but that makes it particularly horrible.
Well, and that is just the case of this one man who was on planes that were full of hundreds of people who were deported and sent to this prison. And of course, the very nature of whether or not those planes ultimately should have landed in El Salvador was in question in the case being overseen by Judge Boasberg, who today said he sees reason to hold administration officials in contempt for violating his verbal order to turn the planes around. I feel free to weigh in on whether that contempt kind of proceeding will change anything here. But what about due process for those individuals who are on board those aircraft?
What about due process? I mean, the fairness of this, there is no fairness. Due process really means fairness. It means an opportunity to present yourself to a court. It means an opportunity to tell the government, no, you know what, I'm not supposed to be part of this, and here's why. And nobody who was sent, the people that were sent to El Salvador, to the Sikhat prison, the notoriously brutal prison run by the two-bit dictator Bukele from El Salvador, those folks, they didn't get any chance to defend themselves. And we see that mistakes were made, whether it was the barber or whether it was the women who were sent down there. We see that mistakes were made, and we see that mistakes can be corrected. What's going on here is that the government, the Trump administration, is doubling down and does not want to follow the courts. There's an open defiance of the United States Supreme Court, playing with words like effectuate. So we all know what that means. It means get him home, for God's sake. That's what the district court said, and that's what the Supreme Court affirmed. And you think of this horrible rhetoric that's coming out of the Oval Office about him being a terrorist, and remind people that you can lie in the Oval Office, but you can't lie in a courtroom. And so you don't hear that same rhetoric from the DOJ, the Department of Justice attorneys who are arguing these cases. They're hemming and hawing for sure, but they all have ethical duties to present good faith arguments to the court, and you're not hearing that hateful those name calling and that sort of thing from the attorneys.
David, we just have 30 seconds left, but if any of those attorneys or others were to be held in contempt of court, is there anything President Trump can do to interfere in that?
Well, there's certainly, I would hope not. I would hope that the president would respect the rule of law. I mean, clearly we've seen indications that is not to be expected with the part of the January 6th insurrection.